PHP isn't an email program, but it does have a function called mail, which hands an email message to the web server's mail transport agent. In this video, I explain the arguments that the mail function expects and how to format the information before passing it to the function. The first argument that mail expects is the recipient of the email. So I'll create a variable called to and then add an email address in the normal format. If you want to prettify the email address by adding the person's name, put the name first and then wrap the email address itself in angle brackets. And if you want to send to more than one person, separate the email addresses by a comma. The second argument expected by the mail function is the subject line of the email. And this is just an ordinary string. Shouldn't contain any new line characters, it just needs to be a single string. The third argument is the body of the email message. It's important to note that the body of the email message must be a single string. So if you're gathering a lot of information from an online form and different fields, you have to concatenate everything together as a single string to pass it as an argument to the mail function. And these three arguments that we have here are basically all you need to use the mail function. So mail, and then pass those three arguments to it. Although these are the only arguments that are required by mail, in practice there are two other arguments that are very frequently used. The fourth argument is for additional headers, and I'll use a variable called headers. These additional headers are email headers like CC, BCC, from, and so on. If you add more than one additional header, each one has to be separated by a carriage return and new line character. So I'll use a double quoted string so that I can use the escape characters, and then from, and the header is followed by a colon, and then it will be, say, webmaster at example.com, and then \r\n. That creates the carriage return and new line character. Some web servers automatically set the value of the from header, but if it's not set automatically by your web server, you need to include this in your script, otherwise you will generate an error. By default, the PHP mail function uses the Western European encoding, so if you're using UTF-8 encoding in your web pages, you need to add a header for the correct encoding. So I'm going to use the combined concatenation operator, which is a period followed by an equal sign, and then I will have another header which will be content type, colon, text/plain, then a semicolon followed by char set equals UTF-8, and then a carriage return and a new line character. And let's copy this to somebody else. So another header with the combined concatenation operator, and then CC followed by the email address. Now, if that's the last header, you don't need to have the carriage return and new line character at the end, so let's just finish it like that. And then you would insert that as the fourth argument to the mail function. The fifth argument is increasingly being demanded by many hosting companies. It's a security measure, and it ensures that the mail has been sent by an authorized person. In other words, to stop spam. So if your hosting company requires this fifth argument, you add it in like this, comma after the headers, and then it has to be a string, and it begins with a hyphen F and then immediately followed by your email address. So those are the 5 arguments used by the mail function. The first 3 are required, the last 2 are optional, but are increasingly being used. So it's to the recipients, the subject line, the body of the message as one complete string, any additional headers separated by carriage returns and new line characters, and then finally, if it's required by your hosting company, a string which consists of -f followed immediately by your own email address. The mail function returns a Boolean depending on whether it succeeds or fails, so it's quite useful to capture the success of the message in a variable like that. You can then use this Boolean variable in a conditional statement to find out whether the mail has succeeded or not. Now, before you try this out for yourself, there are a couple of important points to note. The first one is that the mail function needs to communicate directly with a mail transport agent, and you're unlikely to have one in your local testing environment, so you'll need to do this on your remote server. The other point to note is that when mail returns this Boolean variable, it only tells you whether it managed to pass it on to the mail transport agent. After that, it has no responsibility whatsoever for the mail. So even if success is true, it won't guarantee 100% that the email will be delivered. That depends on everything else that happens in the email chain. So that's how you use the mail function and format the information that's passed to it as arguments.